leader. Would you like to hear some straight talk about big lessons you learn when you lead a business and a team for 13 years? Specifically, those tough people lessons that can mess with your heart and your head. That's what's in store for you today. I'm bringing back Dr. Rebecca Dekker. She's been a member of the Leadership Lab now for 3 years, and she's ready to share with us some uncomfortable examples of how she's learned, grown, and recovered from those team experiences that can be both troubling and triumphant. Welcome to the Stacking Your Team podcast, smart leadership for women who mean business. If you're a woman who owns an established business with a team of 5 or more, and you're ready to lead with more confidence, clarity, and impact, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Shelli Warren. Each episode delivers practical strategies to help you build a high-performing team and become the leader your business needs next. Let's get started with this reminder. The team that got you here may not be the team that will get you there. Dr. Rebecca Dekker is a long-standing member of the Leadership Lab. She's the founder and CEO of Evidence-Based Birth and the author of Babies Are Not Pizzas. They're born, not delivered. Dr. Dekker earned a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD in nursing. Previously, she was an assistant professor of nursing at the University of Kentucky, and in 2016, she left academia to focus full-time on the mission of evidence-based birth, which she continued to elevate these past 13 years. EBB is an education business that supports and uplifts birth workers who are feeling alone, traumatized, and helpless. She helps them find community, hope, and the strength to use their voice. Rebecca leads a remote team who are all committed to working to create a world in which all families have access to safe, respectful, evidence-based, and empowering care during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. She's married to Dan, and they have 3 active kids who have a flair for learning and entrepreneurship themselves. Come on, join me. Let's talk with Rebecca. Welcome back to the Stacking Your Team podcast, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me back.
I'm thrilled to have you back. I love showcasing the wonderful clients that I get to work with. And the work that you and the EBB team is just so, warm-hearted comes to mind. But I think it's also so necessary now. Like we really do need to, as women and mothers and sisters and daughters and caregivers and grandmothers, we need to be more aware of what's happening out there in the world of birth to take care of our birthing families.
Yeah, it truly is a global topic because every single one of us was born at some point, so it affects everybody.
Yeah, it does. And there's just so many new breakthroughs and advances. And then on the flip side, there are so many unfortunate moments as well that I think now we talk about it more, or we're hearing about those tragedies more, or those traumas more. So we're becoming more educated about that as well. Whereas, in my generation and in my mother's generation, those were secrets that no one talked about. I remember when I found out that my grandmother had a baby boy who was stillborn. And if he had lived, he would have been the same age as my brother. So that meant my mom and my Nana were pregnant at the same time. And I found this out by thumbing through a family Bible. My Nana and Grandpa had this massive Bible. It was huge, just huge. And I found it one day in a china cabinet, and I decided to pull it out. I think I was probably about 13. And I pulled it out and I started going through it, and I found this little tiny death announcement that was cut out of the newspaper. And I was shocked, like to the bone. And I remember when I went home that evening, I said to my mom, I just flat out asked her, did Nana have a baby boy? And her face just went white. So, she told me this story, but I remember it was just incredibly derailing.
Yeah, there's a lot of generational trauma around childbearing, pregnancy, postpartum, and I do think it's been a positive change that people are talking more about birth. And I had something similar happen. We discovered that my grandmother had twin siblings who were also experienced death, and we never knew they had existed until, you can use ancestry.com to find things, and all of a sudden you're finding birth certificates and death certificates of, it just was not talked about. So there's a lot in birth. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of sorrow and everything in between. And it's a very personal topic. So, and a lot of people who work with me have personal reasons for doing so. Like they usually have what I call an origin story. And sometimes it's, I had an amazing pregnancy and birth experience and I want other people to have that. Or, I had a traumatic experience. I want to help people avoid that. So there's a lot of personal background that goes into and like frames how you go into this field.
Well, your peer in the Leadership Lab, Amanda Hunter, by the time this episode airs, she will have been a few episodes back. But her origin story of why she launched her therapy practice was because of the trauma around the birth of her sons. And so you're right. The whole origin story for me, what was so upsetting for finding that out about my Nana is that she had 5 girls and then had a 6th pregnancy, carried him to full term. And then he ended up being stillborn, born with a cord around his neck. And it was just like, I just remember bawling my eyes out over it. And it's still very upsetting to me. And also the whole notion that it was a secret. I think that made it somehow worse.
It was something to be ashamed of, like it was your fault.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I always looked at my brother in a totally different light after knowing that, because we're only 2 years apart. Just sort of had a different perspective about women and what they go through to really bring us these families that we all have. So it's just always interesting for sure. And so the work that you and your team do at Evidence-Based Birth is just so astounding to me. And we've been working together now. We're going into our 3rd year that we've been working together. And I just keep learning more and more and more from you, Rebecca.
Yeah. And the rabbit holes never end. There are endless things that I could study or research when it comes to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, newborn care. Everything you can possibly imagine had stuff written about it. So we have a lot of research to do, and I don't know if we'll ever be finished, but we keep working on it.
Well, we're all far better off that we do have people like you and the dedicated people that are on your team, because it's so worthwhile. And I'm happy to have you back here today because you've been in business for a long time.
12 years.
12 years. And that is no joke. Not a lot of small businesses can claim that. And you have an online business. So you had an online business before it was cool to have an online business. And you've been, now it's, very common for people to have online businesses, but you've had a very successful, very profitable, continually growing online business in a special niche. So it's not, you have a very different story in terms of the other online businesses that are out there that serve seemingly the masses. Like you've got a really wonderful niche and you've developed a ton of mastery in that. So I'm interested to learn from you today. It's like Rebecca's philosophy on what it takes to be a leader in this day and age as a small business owner throughout that time, because so much has changed over those 12 years. Even just how we think about small business, let alone the tech, that has come along with it, and just people's perception of working for an online business. What do you mean I don't have a workplace? All of those kind of things have evolved. So you've got some big lessons that you want to share with us today. And so the first thing that I would love to get your perspective on, it's the whole idea of what have you learned about yourself as a business owner and a leader in terms of trusting yourself. So trusting your thought process, trusting your feelings, trusting what your body's telling you so that you can really discern what your next best step is.
That's a really good question, because I think I have pretty good business instincts. I don't think I could have grown my business and kept it running through all the ups and downs of the last 12 years without having kind of that knack of business, which, I don't credit to myself. We have an incredible team. But at the end of the day, I do have to make some big decisions. And I do think looking back before I move forward, I have to credit my grandfather and grandmother on my dad's side of the family. They were entrepreneurs. Like his whole life, he was an entrepreneur, and his wife did the bookkeeping and helped organize the business. So there's that side of the family. And then my mother had a mother who was also very entrepreneurial, and she managed a candy shop and loved marketing and business. So even though I went into healthcare, I think I did grow up in an entrepreneurial kind of atmosphere, not with my parents per se, but with that history of my grandparents doing that. But the thing that I've had to work on the most are my instincts in understanding people. And so I think, you talked about being an online business, and we are. And so some things are unique to having a completely remote company. But, I struggle with the same things that the other people in the leadership lab do: hiring, firing, performance, HR matters, team culture, team meetings. All of those things are leadership aspects. And even though my whole life I feel like I've been tagged, hey, you're a leader, it doesn't mean it comes naturally to me. People may naturally want to follow me, but I need to have the discernment. So one of the things I've found is, even though I honor my instincts when it comes to business decisions and that sort of thing, I don't always follow my instincts when it comes to people. So I was a little bit hamstrung in that way, I think, as a child, because I came from a family that really valued honesty, not maybe 100% transparency. I think every family has its secrets, but, honesty was one of the core ethical principles for my parents. And so that's the kind of atmosphere I grew up in. And I feel like a pretty small circle of my family, several very close friends. And then I was a nursing professor, so I worked closely with other people in academia. But I never really started to feel lied to on a regular basis until I went into business and started interacting with, I don't want to say the general public, but just with a wider net of people. So one of the things I've had to learn over the past 12 years is that people do not always share the full facts with me, or they may blur the lines of truth. And so as a straightforward person who, as I said, I was indoctrinated into this world of honesty is the best policy and truth telling. It's important for us to speak our truth. It's hard for me to assume the worst of people. Like, it's hard for me to assume or even understand that someone might be lying to me. So that was a really hard lesson I learned over the last 12 years. And it took repeated lessons of me learning this. And my therapist, which I'm a strong believer that if you run a business, you need to be in therapy. She said, the universe is going to keep sending me the same lesson until I get it. And I do think I might not always be able to prevent situations, but I can identify them much more quickly now. And so my therapist says not to assume the worst. So she says, Rebecca, you don't have to assume everybody's lying to you. She said, you need to use discernment. And that's a different way. It's not like this or that. It's kind of in the middle. And so in the workplace, what I found, and dealing with customers, team members, anybody you encounter in the world of business, most people are going to initially present themselves in the best light, just like they would in a relationship, just like they would if they were going off to college and meeting classmates or roommates or new friends. But over time, sometimes over a year or two, their conditioning starts to show. Just like I was conditioned as a child to always tell the truth, no matter what, other people have different backgrounds and experiences. And what I've come to find out is that my body can intuitively sense that something is wrong before my cognition or my brain does. And this has happened every single time something has gone wrong in my business. When I go back and reflect, I say, I had a feeling, but I overrode that feeling and I didn't trust my body. So trying to understand what is my body telling me and how? And so at one point, I actually had to go back and write down. I kind of did this exercise where I imagined somebody was lying to me or acting out in a certain way. And then I wrote down all the things I was feeling in my body when I imagined that scenario. And then I imagined a scenario where somebody was telling me the truth and everything was going well. And I could feel like I wrote down everything I felt in my body. Like, for example, when someone is not telling me the whole truth, or maybe they're hiding something, I can feel like my breathing gets up higher in my chest, or I feel tension in my arms or my hips, or, there's things that my body tells me. And I think that's really unique. Interesting thing about humans is that we can sense things almost before they happen. And it's because our body is picking up little cues before our brain can.
Yeah, I love that you said that you started to recognize that you felt something was wrong. For me, I always say that I sensed something was off. So it's not a feeling for me. It's more like a sense of it.
A sensory thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, ooh.
But it's not just a thought. Like, there's actually a feeling in your body.
Yeah. It's you feeling it. Yeah. Like for me, it kind of goes up through my shoulders, up into my shoulders and right up the top of my head.
Right.
Like it's like a wave. It's just like a wave that goes off. And I'm like, yeah, I sensed something was off about that. And then, of course, we beat ourselves up because when we don't listen to it and we don't respond to it, we don't take action based on this new information that your body's giving you, then that's when we find that we get into trouble, and then we're remorseful about it.
Yeah, not so much remorseful, but kind of like, wow, I could have prevented all that heartache if I had just listened to my body. And I feel like I've also seen this, and other members of the Leadership Lab have had similar stories where they knew that it was not going to go well with a certain team member or customer long before everything kind of reached its tipping point. But, especially as women, I think we really want to give people as many chances as possible to fix things, prove it right. And I have been proven wrong before. Like, I have had some people where I got a feeling and then they were able to fix things or get things back on track. So I think this one way that's helped me when I'm thinking of how my body reacts to different situations is like the concept of like there's green flags and there's red flags, but there's also pink flags. So now when I feel something in my body that is kind of a little early warning sign, I almost think of it as like a pink flag. I'm going to monitor this really closely, so that if it turns into a red flag, I can jump on it. I won't be completely surprised. And so for me, in terms of, people not always presenting themselves or sharing the full truth, there's like this rule of threes I read about in a book where they say like one broken promise, one lie, or one neglected responsibility, which could easily happen in the workplace, right? Someone could break a promise. They might not do what they were assigned to do. So the rule of threes is that one of those things might be a misunderstanding. Two might be a serious mistake. But if you have all three, if they've, not shared the full truth with you, they've neglected their responsibilities, or they've broken a promise, then it's time to say, no more, we can't do this relationship. So that has been helpful for me because I tend to be more of I'm not a woo-woo person. I don't go with what I'm feeling. I want to have like data, So the pink flag helps me. All right, eyes up, ears open. I'm paying attention to what's happening. And then I know when it's time to shift directions.
Yeah, you're letting that data really drive your decisions because you're noticing the compounded effort of it, right? Like there was 3 incidences, or if there was one situation, you could explain that. But when there's a second and when there's a third, okay, this is a real thing.
And people go through hard times and maybe they let something slide. And so it becomes, how can I know? I can know something is off if my body is throwing up all these red flags at me. And so, or pink flags. And I just have to trust myself more which I said again is hard because with business decisions, I feel like I trust my body. But with people issues, I have a harder time. And I can tell you recently an example of somebody who was emailing wanting something from me. It was not somebody who worked at our company, but the email came across, I instantly felt almost like not chest pain, but I felt myself tighten and like almost recoil from the computer. And then I had to say, okay, and my breathing got fast and I had to stand up and walk around. And I was like, oh, that's a trigger. Like, this is something that's triggering me. Why is it? So I kind of talk it out with my husband. Then I go back and reread the message. And I'm like, oh, this is triggering me because they're claiming ownership over me. And I have found as a woman business owner, because I am a woman, people treat me differently. And one of the ways they treat me differently is that they assume that I owe them, like my time, my attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's happened to me enough that now I physically feel it when somebody is like demanding something of me, which they're not entitled to. And it freaks me out. I start to feel trapped and I'm like, I got to get away from this person. But that I've learned is a red flag. So, that's kind of a good lesson now, 12 years in, is that when I start to feel my heart rate go up, or I feel those things, it's not some irrational anxiety. It's not anxiety. Like, anxiety is a real thing, and I've had that in the past. But if it comes out of nowhere and it's in response to a person, like, there's a reason I'm reacting to it. And that to me is red flag.
I love how you're becoming very aware of these nuances over the years. I think in the beginning, you may have been just, really focused on getting the business going, and we can kind of like brush off these thoughts. We can brush off these feelings. But then the more years that pass and the more experiences you have and the more wise you become, then you really start to listen and pay attention to these things. So I love the idea of the whole rule of threes, and then the red, the green, and the pink flags. I think those are really great lessons to share with us, Rebecca.
Yeah, sometimes one of our team leaders, we talk about this all. Pink flag, she'll say pink flag.
Oh.
So we kind of have standardized that language. It's like, it could be red, but right now it's just kind of a pink, but it could get darker and turn into red. So we're going to be careful.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So the other thing that has happened over the years is that you've become really good at leaning into a couple of tools. One, of course, is conflict resolution, which I'm a huge proponent of confrontation. I think most people think that word is a bad word. And I'm always trying to convince people it's not a bad word. It's a word. It's just a word. Let's stop labeling it or stop putting our own projections on it. But you've definitely leaned into learning how to leverage conflict resolution as a tool. And then the other tool that has become important to you is the whole idea of setting boundaries.
I think, going back to my last example where I got the message from somebody we'd never worked with before, this is a total stranger to us. This was where I said, okay, why am I feeling this way? It's because they're violating a boundary. And the boundary for me is that, you can't demand things of my personal time. I can give my time. You can pay me for my time if I agree to, but you can't insist that I give you time that's not yours to insist on that. So where I start to realize, okay, so they're encroaching on me as a person. So with boundary setting, it can be difficult because with work, there's going to be conflict and people have, disagreeing opinions, and people might have trouble coming to an agreement. And I think it's really interesting as someone who, my heritage is Dutch from the Netherlands. It's really interesting if you read about workplace culture in the Netherlands, they really value group brainstorming and coming to, group resolutions where we get all together, we figure out what's going on, and then we agree together on a solution. It's very kind of democratic in a way, if you will. But at work or with, customers, teammates, not everybody wants to resolve conflict like that. Like, some people will come at you like they're in a battle, where they're ready to fight to the death and they're focused on getting their way. Another type is conflict avoidant, where somebody might just shut down and refuse to engage with you anymore. And then there's people that I think I tend to fall in the category of being like a people pleaser, a peacemaker. So I want to, like I already said, I want people to talk and come to an agreement. But I found that doesn't always work because some people don't want to come to a group agreement. It's like their way or the highway. And then we have a fourth type too, which is more pathological. This might be more nefarious, where somebody is using backstabbing, gossip, manipulation, playing the victim, trying to manipulate the situation to get their way. And so I have to have like really good conflict resolution skills and also know that I'm not going to be able to resolve every conflict. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree. And I've had that several times throughout the past 12 years where it's like, okay, like we are not ever going to agree on this. So we'll probably have to part ways. And in terms of the workplace, having a culture where we talk about boundaries a lot, we encourage people to set healthy boundaries. And I try to role model that as well. And so when this email came in and they were demanding something of me, I realized, okay, these emails shouldn't even be making it to me anymore. Like, hard stop. There's no reason this should come through to me. And so what we ended up doing is teaching that customer representative how to deal with those kinds of questions for people who are demanding, entitled, and that sort of thing. And then toxic communication strategies, we just can't permit them. Because if you're going to have disagreements, that's fine. We can talk about things. But you shouldn't ever go to another team member to talk about another team member unless the point is you're going to talk about how to approach the other team member and involve them. And so I can't let toxic communication like get a hold in my organization, because then it turns into politics, which politics is basically a lot of lying and backstabbing and that sort of thing. And I'm like, no, that cannot be my workplace. I will not last in a workplace like that.
Yeah. Do you find sometimes, maybe not now, but even over the course of the 12 years, that your team looked to you to resolve the conflict? Like they're deflecting, deferring to you. They just want it, they want you to come and tell them what to do or how to fix it, how to move forward, so that no one really has to take ownership, or no one really has to hone their confrontation skills or hone their conflict resolution skills. They just defer to you to come in and set the direction.
And then I have to do it all.
Yeah. So, or where they're wanting you to set the direction and solve all the problems.
Yeah. Whenever there's something where I feel like people depend on me, I see that as a weakness in my organization, because it's not sustainable if I'm the only fallback for something. So really a long time ago, whenever something like this came up, I would make an SOP. This is a great tool I learned from you, is just turn everything into an SOP. So we have an SOP for decision making. So as a group, when we have an issue, we actually have guidelines and discussion questions that we use for confronting the issue. And then in terms of people who want to violate our boundaries or, are kind of trespassing on our boundaries, we have another SOP about that as well. That one was also really interesting to create. So I have an SOP called entitlement. What do you do when people are acting like, making demands, unreasonable demands? And we have a whole SOP about how to do it. Don't raise your voice, stay calm, don't provide confidential information, be prepared to walk away if it gets abusive. And so we have scripts that we can use when dealing. And it's really, I've come like a long ways from, I would say 6 or 7 years ago, I still believed in like the customer is always right, because that's what you always hear. And then I realized, wait a second, we have this whole category of people though, that they're not engaging with you in hopes for it to be a win-win. So you can't, we have to use discernment. I'm not going to assume the worst about people, but we also can't give up our boundaries. So learning how to uphold our boundaries, using conflict resolution tools, being able to confront someone. You said the word confrontation. There's a really great book called Mastering Respectful Confrontation. And the author explains that the word confront literally means with your front, with your heart open or face to face. So we do believe in having those kinds of discussions, but at the same time, if someone repeatedly crosses our boundaries, then we don't have to engage with them. We have to, because my teammates, I have to protect them. I have to have a healthy workplace for them. And if they don't have these tools on how to protect themselves, like I can't be the one just jumping in to save them all the time. So I think it's actually been really empowering for everyone. My team, has access to be able to, we pick the brain of my therapist occasionally, or we have a chaplain that we can bring in. So we have different ways of getting support for our team with conflict resolution. But I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, I love the self-sufficiency that you're building in. It's an expectation that as a team member at EBB, you will learn this life skill that falls under the category of communication skills. And it's really helping them be able to have wonderful relationships with the people that they work and with the relationships with the people that they serve. And it's not always perfect. And you may try something and it falls flat, but we just need to be able to get back up again and go and face that conversation again and be open to hearing what they have to say and have it truly work towards those win-wins. But often in the workplace, unfortunately, there are too many individuals that they're there to win. They're just there to win, to have their idea put forth, to have things done their way. And typically those individuals don't last long because they're not collaborative and they're quickly considered not a long-term fit. And so we look to move those individuals out. So I'm thrilled to know that you're working so hard and that you've got all these SOPs, and it truly is a life skill. It's one that I learned early in my corporate career. And one of the little phrases that I've never stopped using when someone comes to me and wants to tell me about, my problem today with Jill. Do you know what she did today? My response is always, and what did she say when you talked to her about that?
Not allowing the gossip behind someone's back. Yeah.
Yeah. Because typically the individual would say, well, I haven't talked to her about it. Well, why? You're talking to me about it. Why aren't you talking to her about it? So it's that whole idea of making it a habit to teach people that they really can have these conversations with their peers. And even the difficult conversations with clients and customers, you can learn how to do that really well.
For sure.
As well. we don't have to toe the line with the customer's always right concept anymore, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess that you could say that's a big second lesson I learned. The customer's not always right.
Yeah.
And can I give a few more examples?
Sure.
Okay. So with boundary violation, for example, one of our boundaries is we don't permit homophobic or transphobic language in our social media, in emails sent to us. So I created actually SOPs for how to deal with these people. There has been in the last couple of years just a new wave of really homophobic, transphobic rhetoric, which is really sad. And it's also not safe for members of my team that are part of those communities. And it makes the world less safe for all of us. So I created SOPs for best practices for social media. So when we are amplifying stories from LGBTQ plus accounts that we follow or sharing pride posts or imagery, we have to be aware ahead of time that there are trolls and there are people just with lots of hate that are going to react to that. So we act in a very proactive way and we have a plan. I worked with a pastor to actually write a whole response to kind of like a form response or template response for people who write into our customer service team and spew hateful rhetoric, which sadly happens a lot. So we now have a really nicely written, because we used to just delete, block, but I felt like this is an opportunity to educate some people as a privileged person. So we composed a really thoughtful response that does not dehumanize the person who writes in, even though they're dehumanizing whole groups of people. And I'm really proud of that because now our team doesn't have to deal with these people, but we're also just not doing nothing. You know what I mean? So that was another example of a way we're able to set a boundary. And we're also just really clear on our website in terms and conditions, like this kind of rhetoric, slurs, these kinds of things are absolutely like we have zero tolerance. We typically now send that form email and then we go ahead and like proactively block them from all of our platforms. So we have a whole process to deal with that.
Yeah. I love how you're taking a stand for this in a really active way because you're educating anyone that follows you and your brand and works with you and your team or is even affiliated with the clients and the other organizations that you serve. They're learning from you how to respond, how to react in a way that is so much more helpful than a lot of things that we see online. So bravo to you for taking the initiative and going the extra mile and really amplifying what it is that you stand for. It means a lot in this day and age, for sure. We need more, especially women who are in leadership roles, to step up and do those things. So the last thing I want to talk to you about today is what do we do? I mean, you have a lot of experience with this and 12 years in with your business. I know you've had the iterations of your team have ebbed and flowed over the years as well. So I'm wondering, what do you do when people project their trauma onto you as a business owner, as their leader? How do you deal with that? Whether they're doing it intentionally or not, oftentimes the leader and the business owner gets the brunt of their emotions.
Yeah, this is a good question. It's probably my third hard lesson is what to do when people are projecting onto me. Because I feel everything. I feel people's emotions, sometimes even long distance. I can feel what they're feeling, and it can kind of be a superpower, but can also be something that brings me down. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're a woman leader, people, I think, are more likely to try and cross your boundaries. They're also, I feel like we deal with a lot more insults thrown our way and criticism. Being a woman, I think people talk to me in a way that they wouldn't talk to a male. And when people insult me, I will then kind of take a step back and look at the insult. And then I realize every single time they're just projecting their own feelings about themselves onto me, which is a really kind of unhealthy way of managing your own issues. But it happens so often. And so I've talked with my therapist about this a lot. And so she kind of explained it to me like this. She's like, Rebecca, like a team member or a customer, any member of the public who interacts with you might be triggered, and they might start to react out of their own previous trauma or their unresolved experiences. For example, someone might have unresolved trauma from when they were a child. With an adult or an authority figure in their life. You know, maybe somebody abandoned them or treated them cruelly. And they may eventually begin to project some of those feelings in an effort to protect themselves. They kind of project it onto someone else to get it off their chest. And their patterns begin to show. And this is my therapist says their parent stuff. And I don't like to be seen as a top-down kind of company, but because I am the majority owner of the business, people will see me as this quote unquote authority figure. And so if they've had these traumatic experiences in the past, they may lash out at me, and I kind of become that punching bag. And so knowing this helps me be more compassionate. When someone starts to all of the sudden try to beat me or my team up, or sling insults or toxic rhetoric, then I know it's not us. You know, it's their own stuff. And knowing that this happens, then it kind of goes back to boundaries. So I have to know what we're willing to tolerate as a team and our culture and in our organization. And people who want to work with us need to be able to deal with their own stuff in a healthy way that doesn't involve projecting onto other people in our team. And so learning this has been really helpful for me because then I try not to take it personally. As a peacemaker, it can be really hard, to just walk away from that kind of rhetoric. But what I do is sometimes I close my eyes and I imagine it just bouncing off of me and back to them. My therapist also told me one time, she said, you don't have to catch every ball that someone throws at you.
So true. So true. So true. But we often do.
So I'll tell myself over and over, this is not mine. This belongs to someone else. This is not mine.
Mm-hmm.
This belongs to someone else. Because at the end of the day, they don't know me. They don't walk through my day with me. And if they're, throwing these insults at me or at my team, it's not ours to catch. It's not ours. They're not in the daily grind with us, so they don't know.
It's so true. And in the heat of the moment, what's really happening is you're really honing your ability to stop and reflect versus catch and react. You've really learned how to master that. What are you seeing or what are you hearing even amongst your colleagues out there? And even, in the leadership lab, we often talk about the new wave of slang in today's workplace culture where it's becoming very common now for team members to say to their leader, that's very triggering. I'm feeling very traumatized about this conversation. This workplace is toxic.
Yeah, I think those words get overused a lot. I was really lucky on our podcast a long time ago, and you can have the link if you want to share it in your show notes. I had one of my closest friends and my business best friend, Kristen Pascucci. She came on the EBB podcast to talk about how to disagree respectfully. And she actually has a whole segment in there where she talks about when you feel these feelings in your body, you can separate your response from your emotions that you're feeling. If it is bringing back a past trauma, then you need to work through that. And you can't just lash out at the person who kind of gave that memory came up because of them. And we remember things in our bodies. So I don't doubt that people are feeling, like I told you, that email that I got that I had to stand up, walk away and breathe. And I was like, my heart rate was up. It was based on something real that happened in my past. But the person that sent me that email wasn't there, 5 years ago when that happened. So it's not like it's their fault for triggering me. It's more like a reminder, okay, I need to set my boundaries. And then I also think Kristen Pascucci is really interesting. Her website is Birth Monopoly, and she has an Instagram page. She approaches it differently. She says, this is a triggering space, is what she says. She said, we are going to be talking about trauma. And she talks about obstetric violence, which, talk about a triggering subject. So she's like, I'm not going to censor myself. Like, if you are not in a space to deal with this, like, you need to not engage here because we're going to be talking about hard things. So
I think sometimes team members, they declare, this is triggering for me, this is traumatic for me, in a way to shut you down, in a way to remove themselves from the conversation or remove themselves from the situation, whether you're providing them feedback or
like almost like using it like you said, a way to shut things down. So in that case, if that has not been an issue in our workplace, but if it was, I would just make an SOP for it. I would probably say something like, if you feel your heart rate go up, if you start to feel nauseous or whatever from memories, like, here's what you can do. You can just let people know, hey, I just need a minute to gather myself. I'm going to take a 5-minute walk and I'll be right back. Or, hey, can we come back to this tomorrow? I need to process this and then I'll be able to come to it with a clearer head tomorrow. So I think it's okay for people to pause because if you get in your body and then you're not, able to have kind of more logical conversations, that can also be a trap you don't want to find yourself in.
Well, and as the business owner and as the leader, that requires part of your role is to help develop other people. And if every time you want to have a coaching conversation with someone, they're trying to shut that down by saying to you, this is triggering, this is traumatic for you, this is, causing some really bad memories to bubble up for me, then you're never going to get through those difficult adult conversations to really help the individual move forward. So I love the idea that and you're helping your team learn too, that the individual that's having those feelings needs to address those feelings. Just putting a hand up and saying, stop, I can't take this, just isn't going to work over and over and over again. We're in the real world here.
Yeah, not repeatedly, for sure. And I think it goes back to the projection again then. It's like they're taking past unresolved trauma and putting it on you. And they're actually, someone's not trying to do that. It's probably a reflex, probably subconscious that, they don't know they're violating some boundary or some topic. And then I think it also goes back to just like also team leaders having sensitivity about what are sensitive topics. Pregnancy, fertility, miscarriage, natural disasters, war, genocide. Like there are topics that for some people are incredibly personal. And so we have to be careful, in what we say as leaders too.
Yeah, we own that for sure. We own the psychological safety within our workplaces for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fascinating, Rebecca. I could talk to you for hours. I love being around you in person as well. We always learn so much from you. You always help kind of guide us into these deeper conversations that resonate with all of us, and they just become so memorable. So I really appreciate having you in the Leadership Lab. You always add so much value, and I know your peers really trust and admire you as well. So how can our listeners learn more about you and stay more connected with you?
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested, I think a great way to get started is my book, Babies Are Not Pizzas, They're Born, Not Delivered. That actually talks a lot about trauma. So that's kind of an interesting way to get introduced. And you can go to evidencebasedbirth.com and check out all of our free resources. And we are on Instagram at EBBirth.
Yes. And your podcast is wildly popular.
That's right. I forgot to mention the podcast. We have a podcast as well.
Yes. And you've been on air for how many, 6 years, 7 years?
I think we're on 6 years now, but don't quote me on that. But we did just recently pass like 6 million downloads. So it reaches a lot of people. And I'm really honored to be able to work at Evidence-Based Birth and do this research for a living. And then I've always loved psychology and studying mental health. And so it's been really cool to implement these strategies that I've talked about with you that I've learned over the years. And now I can teach them to my kids. So when someone's insulting them at school, like they know. We talk a lot about boundaries, about how to use discernment in terms of choosing friends, about when someone's projecting onto you their own feelings of inadequacy and how that's not yours. You don't have to catch that ball when people throw it at you. And so it's been interesting to see how these concepts can be applied across life.
Yeah, they really are life skills. I love that you see these easy transitions between what you do at the business and how it can help you and your family and your friends and everyone that surrounds you. So thanks so much for always elevating us as leaders. You're always so insightful, Rebecca. And thank you so much for sharing all your brilliance with us today.
Thank you, Shelli.
I'm sure you appreciate Rebecca being so open with us as much as I did. It matters. We need to feel more secure about moving through these growth periods. You need to feel more secure about moving through your growth periods. You're evolving. So is your team. And so is your business. Now, you hear me say it all the time that the people side of the business is often the most difficult. But you don't have to go through those lessons like these alone. Joining the Leadership Lab could be your very best next step to finally being surrounded by women similar to you who are also learning about themselves, changing, growing, and learning how to lead. So your team turnover settles down. People know exactly what they're being paid to do, and the results you've been wanting your team to deliver actually happens. The Leadership Lab is welcoming new members right now. It's my transformational small group coaching program designed to accelerate your effectiveness to lead your team really well while removing yourself from the day-to-day operations. Apply today. You and your team will be thrilled that you did. And if you are a birthing professional or an expecting parent, I want to encourage you to check out all of Rebecca's links that you'll find in the show notes. Her evidence-based birth, or EBB, Instagram account is full of insight, videos, and clips from her wildly popular podcast of the same name. You know, with over 10 million downloads, it's sure to become your favorite too. Go see what Rebecca and her team are doing to support birth workers and parents. You'll be glad you did. So until next time, let's do less managing and more leading by making space to lead and letting go of the rest.